The first time you get a DUI, it's part of your court mandate. You have to hear a victim's story. Wow. And so I got to speak to thousands of people and be like, you get a second chance. This is what you could have done to someone.
Right.
But because you didn't kill someone when you drove drunk, you now have the opportunity to go out there and make a better choice. Or you could look at someone like me in court and have this pain be directed at you.
Thank you for joining us today. Before we start, we'd love for you to subscribe to our podcast and connect with us on social media. We value your stories as much as our own and are committed to sharing them. Visit our website for more information. All links are provided in the description. In today's episode, Jocelyn very courageously shares her story about the tragic loss of her mom when Jocelyn was only 16 years old. In sharing Jocelyn's story, our hope is that it helps other people feel less alone and gives them hope in this seemingly endless journey of grief. So, let's dive in.
Welcome back to episode 3 of Nothing Was the Same, Grief Podcast, here with my co-host Jocelyn and Kimberly. And today we are going to really do a deep dive into Jocelyn's story. In the last episode, I shared my story about how I lost my sister and kind of gave you all a run on what that looked like. And so today we're going to be listening to Jocelyn and hearing what she's been through. How are you feeling today?
I feel really nervous and anxious.
Yeah.
It's just so interesting because, as I mentioned in the first episode, my mom was killed by a drunk driver, and I spoke for Mothers Against Drunk Driving for 10 years. I was like the main speaker in LA. I think I started when I was 19, so right after my mom died. So it was so interesting because I'd be speaking mostly in high schools and to first-time DUI offenders, and I would be a year or two older than the people I was talking to. Right. And we'll get into this a lot, I'm sure, on this podcast, but I think that I really was in denial for so long that I was able to kind of tell the story that I'm about to share without even shedding a tear. Like, it wasn't hard for me to talk about. And it's so interesting. As time went on, it got harder and harder to the point where now I really can't do it. Wow. So I'm going to try my best in sharing this story to not just give you guys my speech and just be a little bit more present, because I have told this story hundreds of times in front of way more people than just you and cameras with people who might not listen behind it. Somehow feels intense still.
Just speaking so raw afterwards. And I think there's something that happens after grief that until it integrates fully, I do think there's something that separates you from it. Mm-hmm. And I think that could be from a survival mechanism too, just being able to tell the story from afar. So I think it's obviously so brave of you that you were able to do that then, but I also think now that you've been able to integrate it in a different way, it's even, dare I say, more vulnerable and more brave, because it's really part of you now. Obviously then too, because you were so young.
Yeah.
You ready to?
Yeah, I guess I'll just start. So just a little bit of a background on me and my mom. So my mom had me when she was 19, and she was a single parent. And she met my dad when I was 3, and they got married. And so I was very blessed to grow up with them. My 2 brothers are 5 and 10 years younger than me. And my parents were young parents. So we just had so much fun. And part of me wishes that I wasn't 33 and I already had a 15-year-old like she did by my age. Just because I know a 15-year-old and a 5-year-old and a 10-year-old she had by my age. I have 0 children. But I just think there's something so fun about having young parents. And my parents split when I was 11, but we're still technically married when my mom died 5 years later. And I'm so grateful when I look back, because when my parents split, my mom moved out and my brothers and I stayed with my dad. And I was so angry with her for a long time. And I just did not want to speak with her, and just made it really difficult because I just felt like, she left me.
Yeah, of course.
I literally went on vacation with my grandparents and I came home and she had moved out. Wow. And she told me they told me when I got back from the airport, and I was 11. I was like, what? Yeah. So
what's going on?
It was quite a shock, but I'm just so grateful that we were able to completely get past that before she passed, because people talk a lot about guilt that they carry after grief, and I'm just glad that I don't have to carry that. So by the time that I was 16 when she passed, she was very much my best friend. I remember, telling her about my first kiss, and I remember, whenever my dad would ground me if I wasn't with my dad that weekend. I was not grounded. And like, if we wanted to go to a party, we would go to my house and sleep over because my mom would let us go. Like, and she loved to shop and she was so stylish. And I always borrowed her clothes. So she just really
take after her too.
Oh, thank you. I became a stylist, which she never got to see, but definitely inspired by her. Yeah. She was so beautiful. And so she was very much my best friend. And I'm just so grateful that we had time to kind of mend that relationship.
Yeah, can I ask what that really looked like? Like, when did that, I know you said by the time you were 16, you guys were better, but when, was there a point in time where like you really remember your reconciliation?
I think when she moved out of our home, she like was living with my Uncle Buck for a while, and then she was living with her best friend for like a year.
Yeah.
And I think because my mom had us so young, she needed to like go out with her friends and like, I can't, 31 years old and you've never even like gotten to have a wild night with your friends. And coincidentally, a lot of her best friends and cousins who she was very close with and sister all got divorced around the same time.
Wow.
So it was all these beautiful young women in their early 30s that are just figuring out how to like be alone. And so I think she really needed that year to like have fun with her friends and figure it out. But as an 11-year-old, I was like, take me to cheer practice. Like, I don't care. Why are you in Manhattan Beach with friends? Like, coming out with me. Yeah. So I think I had a hard time with just accepting that. I had no idea how to accept that transition at that age. It just felt like I was her whole world and she left me and my brothers. And she wasn't able to like consistently see us as much because of where she was living. It wasn't where we lived, and we stayed with my dad, and all of our schools were within walking distance.
Wow. Okay.
So we just had this built-in life. But within a year of that, it might be less, I don't know, she got an apartment in Torrance right down the street from us. And that's when I was able to start like just rebuilding with her, because I was able to feel like she was consistently back in my life.
Right.
And I talked in the first episode about feeling like I had to grow up really quickly when I realized that my brothers had lost their mom and I had to become like this adult figure. But I felt like that really at 11 because I was the most consistent person in my brothers' lives. Like, if we're going back and forth all the time, I'm the one that knows what they need and what they had yesterday. Yeah. Like, my parents don't know that they weren't necessarily speaking at that exact time. So I think that I kind of felt like I had to grow up really early at 11.
Right.
But yeah, within like a year, I feel like I had forgiven her.
Wow.
For sure, which is great. So we had some time. So to fast forward to 2007 when she passed away, that Saturday, as I mentioned, she was very stylish, so I was always borrowing her clothes.
Yeah.
She lived within a 5-minute drive, and if I remember correctly, I had her Uggs. No, I had her flat iron, and she needed it for that night.
Okay.
And so she came and picked it up, and I told her, like, if you bring me your Uggs, then I'll give you your flat iron. This is when, like, people were wearing, like, Uggs and jean skirts, and it was so cool.
Yeah.
And so she came by the house. I was the only person that saw her. And I still can like picture her driving away. She had bought me a Volkswagen because I was 16. I was about to get my license. I don't remember the name of the car. It's like a really old Volkswagen convertible. It was really cool. Yeah. Unfortunately, not very safe because that's what she was in that night. So that day I was going to an 80s themed friend's birthday party. It was like a big party within walking distance from my house. I grew up in such a like safe neighborhood where everybody kind of lived close. And I was shopping at the beach, and I like texted my mom the whole time. Like, what did people wear in the 80s? Yeah. Like, we were just always in constant communication. And so I figured out my outfit, and then I had work that night at this Mexican restaurant I worked at called El Gringo, which is so funny, which just means like the white man. And my dad dropped me off, and he told me to have my mom pick me up, even though it wasn't her weekend. Okay. And being a 16-year-old, I just assumed like my mom lives off my schedule, so I can call her when I get off. Right. I don't need to give her a heads up. So I got off work, and she lived closer to the restaurant than my dad did. So I remember I like packed my favorite like meal. It was like beans and rice and cheese with chips, and I was like eating it, and I was calling her cell phone over and over again and talking myself into the voicemail machine, cut me off, like eating it while I'm walking like a mile and a half maybe to her house. And when I got to her apartment, I remember. And it's so strange, like, how your body works. I remember going inside and feeling like it didn't feel right. Like, I waited outside for my friend for 20 minutes to come get me because something... And I didn't even think about it. Right. But I just was like, oh, I'll just wait outside. Which is so weird. It's like, this is my home. Why don't I want to wait in my home? But something just kind of didn't feel right. So my friend Nicole picked me up in her truck. we had to go to the mall because I wanted these like pink heart big earrings with my lime green skirt for this 80s parties. And coincidentally, I was waiting. There was traffic, which there's never traffic in Torrance, but I didn't know I was in the traffic of my mom's accident. I didn't find that out till a little bit later. So we had to stop by my dad's house. And again, this is just all so close to each other, but we had to stop at my dad's house to get something else for this outfit.
Yeah.
This in-depth outfit that I actually kind of remember.
Crazy the things that we can remember.
I know, which I've never really thought till right now that I might have been, I guess I was wearing this outfit when I went to the hospital. I think that's actually never come back to me until this moment.
Yeah.
But we stopped at my dad's house and he was like, your mom's been in a car accident. I don't know anything. Keep your phone close. And my mom was kind of always getting in car accidents. Like she had like driven into the side of a building earlier that year. Like she was totally fine. She totaled her car, which is why she was in my car.
Wow.
And so I was just like, oh, cool. But as soon as we got to the party, which again, this is all like very close, I just didn't feel right. Like I remember like breaking down and my dad called me and he was like, you need to go to UCLA Medical Center right now. And even though he's like a 3-minute drive, I was like, my friend's gonna drive me. Like, I don't wanna wait for you. Yeah. So I start driving there and then when I'm pulling in the parking lot, he's like, calls me again. He's like, where are you? And I told him I'm pulling in and that's when he told me that she had passed. And I remember like jumping out of the car, sprinting this specific hospital. I don't know if they still do. They had metal detectors. So I had to like be like waiting to go in the emergency room, like going through metal detectors. And I run into this like jam-packed emergency room. My mom's sister's there, which is so weird because my mom's family all lived like an hour away. But they were all there. Like my mom's mom was there, her sister was there, her cousins were there. They were just like all sitting in this hallway. And they just like directly took me to this like room with like a sheet over it. And then, I mean, that the night, it felt like the longest night of my life. I was at that hospital for so long. My brothers didn't come. It was just me and my dad. My grandparents ended up showing up. Maybe my aunt, because she was still alive at that time. And then all my mom's family. And then at some point, the police came in and told us like that an 18-year-old girl had hit my mom and basically like killed her instantly. She was with her boyfriend at the time, but he wasn't driving. And it's like, you know, I've never ever let myself harp on this, but he has like a humongous truck. Wow. And I'm just like, man, if they hadn't been in my little car, if they had been in his like humongous truck, like who knows what would have happened. But I mean, he had like back surgery and he was fine. The girl who hit my mom, she had 2 sober adults with her. She was 18 or 19. She just graduated from like a rival high school of mine. So, you know, the next day I went home. I think I tried to fall asleep. I woke up the next day and my dad was telling my brothers. And then I had texted one person that night. It was my mentor. And she had texted my pastor. And I woke up and he had texted me, Hank. And he had told me to come to church that night. And so I had, Renee drove me to church that night and everyone like kind of prayed for me. And it's so interesting because I feel like in the biggest moments of my life, it's just so easy to see that God was working because my parents in the home that I grew up in were not at all religious. My grandparents were Catholic, so I got my first communion. And when it came time to do confirmation, I was like, oh my God, it's so boring. I have to go to like this school and all these classes. And my dad was like, you can do whatever you want. So I would just go to all these churches with different friends. And one friend, Haley, her cousin had joined this protege program at this church called Mosaic. And like on a Thursday night, a year and a half before my mom died, maybe even a year, she was like, oh, my cousin's church is hosting like Chronicles of Narnia at the El Capitan Theater in Hollywood. Do you want to go? So I told my dad I was going to the movies, not in Hollywood, but I was going to the movies. Left that out. We went. And anyway, I ended up finding this church with all these incredible people that I just know if I didn't have that support when my mom died, I wouldn't be the person I am today. I wouldn't have been able to still smile and laugh and be filled with joy if I hadn't first found God, obviously, but also had this community that he gave me. And so like I went to church the next day and then I actually tried to go to school on Monday because I was just like, I don't know. And I'll never forget, I wish I remembered this teacher's name. I guess actually I don't need to call her out, but I walked into school and because I had left a party with all of my friends, I think I mentioned this in the first episode, the girl whose party was Desi, saying all these names. I don't know if these people will see it or not, but she texted me the next day, like, I hope your mom's okay. And I was like, she died. And it was April Fool's Day. Yeah. And so then it was just like this like awful thing of like, not a joke.
Right.
But anyway, when I got to school that Monday, everyone knew because I'd been at a party with all my students. And I feel like I was always late to class. And when the teacher walked in, everyone was kind of around me. And the teacher yelled at me. She was like, Jocelyn, get outside right now. And was like, you're always late. And like going in on me. And I told her what happened and she felt so bad. And I kind of always think about that. It's like one of those memories that come to you of just like, you never really know what someone's going through. And I'm sure the same way that memory has stuck with me, it probably has stuck with her.
Absolutely.
And I don't ever blame her. It was just like kind of bad timing. But I didn't last in school because like after that, she kind of let me walk around and cool off. And then I ran into like a teacher's aide and she was like, go to your room. And I think I told her to go F herself, which like I don't even curse.
Yeah.
And so
it's a fair reaction on a day like that for sure.
Yeah. And then the next day, all my friends decided to take me to Disneyland.
Wow.
But like 30 minutes in,
yeah,
I called my aunt.
Did you last?
No, I called my Aunt Laura and she came and picked me up, the one that ended up passing away.
Like, all these happy people.
Yeah,
out of here.
And so then I just stayed home. And luckily
Yeah.
it was spring break.
Yeah.
Like I think Wednesday spring break started. So it was like great timing.
Yeah.
But I don't know if this happened because I demanded it or because it was suggested, but essentially I took over everything. So we cleaned out my mom's apartment a week after she died.
Is such a hard thing to do that does not get enough credit for. Cleaning out belongings and someone that you love is so difficult.
It is, and it was really hard because all my mom's family came in. They all wanted everything, but I wanted everything.
Right.
So I was like trying to just hold on to everything. And my brothers were so young that I feel like they were never really part of these things. Like it was kind of me. I planned my mom's whole funeral. I figured out what she'd be wearing. I figured out where she'd be buried. You know, the funeral planning process, I don't know how involved you are, but like it's such a sales technique. Like they're like, well, this casket's nice, but like, wouldn't your mom love? Or like, you know,
for a little $5,000 extra, you want to throw this in?
Yes.
Like you're talking,
it's such a scam.
It is.
And I remember them being like, how many police officers do you want escorting your mom on the way to the cemetery? I mean, most people do like 2.
Right.
But if it's on your budget, you can, and I'm like, 2? I'm like, I don't know. So I'm like making all these choices, going to all these meetings at the cemetery, like.
At 16.
Yeah, and like figuring out where she'd be buried and what her thing would say. And, you know, we just went really into action with fighting with family over her things. And at the funeral, I gave a eulogy. I didn't even cry. And or at the wake, I think. I don't remember the order. Tons of people came. And yeah, it just kind of, obviously, nothing was the same. My life very much completely changed. I also think, and obviously no fault to my dad at all, but because I was 16 and I was already such a mature 16, like my brothers were so young. So I feel like I kind of just owned that, like I could take care of myself. And I just think I became very, very independent. And like my dad and I kind of focused more on my brothers, but I also left 2 years later for school. Yeah. Which made me feel so guilty to leave my brothers. Yeah. And, I mean, like I just, like my baby brother, Jamesy, like he would cry when I would leave anyway. It was just like very traumatizing to feel like, do I go live my own life or do I stay here? And like,
there's so much right now that you're saying that's so relatable. I mean, even you speaking that you didn't cry at her eulogy, but you're crying now. It's like, what does the body do to hold, it's almost like it goes into freeze mode.
Yeah.
To just protect you so that you can speak.
And I think that I was in freeze mode for a really long time. I mean, I became like the busiest person you could know. Yeah. And I remember my old best friend, she would come see me speak, and she was such a poised woman. And such a great presenter and speaker, and like someone that I would just be like, I admired her so much and still admire her. And she would see me speak and she'd be like, I feel like you're telling someone else's story. Right. Like you're so disconnected from, like, it's a great story, like in the sense that it's impactful, obviously not great, like it's a shitty story, but like you're probably saving lives, and I didn't even know how to be any other way for a really long time.
And I think that also protects you so that you can tell that story, because I think if you were so integrated with it at that time, at 16 and 19, you know, all those early years of your youth, it's like, who knows if you would have had that ability to really speak and say what needed to be said. Yeah. If it was so part of you.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting is I had to go to court for the trial.
This part, I just want to pause because I think this part, when we initially met, that was something about you that I'll never forget. Like, it was such an impactful part of your story that, and I just want to say that because I think, what you're about to share is just, it's
interesting. Yeah. And again, this is something my brothers didn't have to go to. It's like, this might be for their first time hearing that because I don't think they ever came and saw me speak. But so the girl, like I mentioned, she was 18 or 19 when she hit my mom. She had 2 sober adults in the car that were older than her. She was far past the limit, and I had to go to court with her for a trial. And I remember the first thing I said to her was, I'm sorry, because I was walking out of the courtroom sobbing, crying. And my mom's 2 best friends were on both sides of me. They would look at her, they're like, look what you did. This is her daughter. And for some reason, I just had this compassion because I knew that everyone drove drunk. I knew that. Like, I'd seen it in my life. And it just felt like, even at that very young age, I was like, this is something that you don't think will happen to you.
Right.
And this girl is 18 and like, I don't think that I had ever been in the car with someone that was drunk, but I just could picture it. Like, and so I just felt kind of bad for her because it was like, you just ruined your life. You definitely ruined a lot of people's lives, but I don't know. I just felt like I had this weird compassion for her, and I've never really felt anger towards her. That's never really been part of my journey, which might have just been because I was frozen for so long, I think. To be fair, like, it's very relatable to feel anger. I know a lot of my mom's family like has not gotten over it, but I don't remember how long the trial was. I went to every single court case. Over time, she seemed less and less emotional because she would be crying and then she wasn't, and that would kind of start to bother me because I'm like, oh, are you over this now? You're just more worried about yourself, which is a fair assumption, I guess. But the weirdest thing was that I've never really looked into why this is, but everyone who loved my mom had the opportunity to write a letter to explain to the judge why my mom's life mattered. And I guess that would impact.
I was going to say, as if you needed to prove. Every life, it's
every life matters.
Especially because you have all these loved ones left behind. It's just,
It didn't make sense to me. And again, I was 16. I've never looked into it. There might be a very valid reason in court why this matters. But I had to write a letter. And I remember, when I wrote the letter, explaining all of the moments in my life that I would miss my mom, which would be like, I'd always wanted to live in New York. I'd actually gotten into my dream school in New York, but I was too afraid to go. So I went to a school that was local. But like moving to New York, getting married, getting my first boyfriend, getting all of these big moments, graduating from high school and college, I miss my mom, but also every other moment of my life. I miss my mom. Like, it's not just the big moments.
And often it's the little moments too. It's like reaching for your phone to call this person.
Yeah.
Like you said, you guys were in texting contact all the time. It's like you reach for that just to tell them something so silly or minuscule, but it's like those are the moments that also grief can really hit you.
Yeah, and I don't remember the years after my mom died. Like, there's so much of grieving initially that I have blocked. I also don't remember much of my life with my mom. Like, I think I have like 19 years of memories blocked.
Wow.
Because that's how I was able to freeze and function. Probably still, who knows?
I also think that's very relatable.
But anyway, she was sentenced to 3 years for manslaughter. The year after she was sentenced, I think they changed it from vehicular manslaughter to murder drunk driving, I think. I don't know if that's exactly what it is, but I know that like the year after she was sentenced, the law changed that if she had been sentenced a year later, she would have gotten more time.
Wow.
But yeah, 3 years and she was out early. Like, I Google her all of the time.
I'm sure.
And she has like a LinkedIn and an IMDb, and it's just like, it's something that really haunts me. And again, not out of anger, but just out of, I guess, a little bit out of anger, but not like an anger that overwhelms me, but more so just like I could run into this person. Like, they live in the same not zip code, but the same county as me. I could be like at Starbucks and hear, I've never met anyone with her name, but I know her name, unless she's changed it. So like,
that was something too that you had said to me, because I have a similar person in my sister's life, not in the same context, of course, but holding on to that anger, it's like, I do think that if you were to hold on to the anger of this person more, it would almost keep you from holding your mom's. It's like almost like you're reserving space in your heart for this anger rather than using that space for your mom.
Yeah.
So I do think, as difficult as it is, it's like that anger and not forgiving that person. Even if you don't forgive them, it's like just not even having that context about them. But it's so hard to do.
Yeah, it really is. And I feel like those moments are the moments that I feel the most alone in my grief. Because I'm like, I don't know anyone else that's like, am I gonna run into the person who killed my mom at Starbucks? You know, like, I don't feel like I have a ton of safe spaces to say that.
Right.
A couple, like I definitely have some friends who have had traumatic or more traumatic experiences than me. And I hope if anyone ever listens to this, that, you know, if there's anyone else who has those really weird moments where you're just like, is anyone else in this coffee shop living a very dark reality right now? Or is it just me? But I try not to let that like take over too much. I think that the grief journey is really interesting. It has certainly been for me, and like I've mentioned, I feel like I'm always like the OG of like grief
You were also
in the
so
process
young,
of it, just because I've been grieving for now longer than than my mom was alive. I've been grieving her for 17 years. I had her for 16, so over half my life I've spent in grief.
Right.
And that will just continue to grow. So,
and you also, not only that, but you're grieving as you grow.
Yeah.
Right.
Changes.
So it's like you're 16, you're grieving, and then you're now a full adult, you know? So what does that look like, and how has that impacted your development? How has that impacted your relationships? There's so much in your story specifically that which I think is why you, of all people, like, you have so much to share and can really help people, because you have been through so much without your mom and grieving. So like we talked about, you know, it's like there's the grief, but then there's the of losing your mom, and then there's the grief of your life without your mom. And so for you, that's a lot of life so far already.
Yeah, I saw that once. I follow so many grief pages, and I did see somewhere that like grief is missing the person that you lost and grieving the life you don't get to live with them. And that's what I think so much of like Nothing Was the Same is about too, is like there's so many things I don't get now.
Right.
There's so many things I always have to wonder, like, what would that life be like? Would my mom love my husband? Would my mom try to steal him because he's actually 1 year closer to her age than mine?
Wow.
And she was such a baddie. And so her best friend, when she met Che, she was like, your mom might have fought you for him. But like, even the conversation of how funny that joke would be, like, I don't get to experience that. And I mean, I could brag on my husband. I was going to say not to brag on him, but I can. But I do think that that's like the layer, one of the layers of grief is the older I get, I realize that not only do I have to grieve the life I didn't get with my mom, but I have to grieve the life she didn't get. She was 36 when she died.
Right.
That's 3 years older than I am right now. I just went to my friend's, one of my best friend's 36th birthday party.
Wow.
And I have so much I have so much fear around people who turn 36. And it's not even realistic, you know? It's like the 27 club, like maybe celebrities who have like a dark past when they turn 27, they're like, you know? But like, I feel like that about anyone I know. When they say they're 36, I'm like, one, you're so young. Like, you've nothing figured out. You know? Not that friend specifically, but just like I have so many friends who I'm like, you don't know anything about life. And you're so young. And my mom didn't get to live past you. She was 36 and 27 years old when she passed. She was basically 35, so.
Which I think puts, when you lose someone who is so young, puts birthdays into perspective. It puts growing older into perspective. There's so much. People complain to me now and they're like, I'm so old, I just turned 33. And I'm like, okay, one, you're not old.
Yeah, first of all, because I'm 33. So.
Yeah, so back it up. But secondly, like, you're talking to someone who lost their sister at 29. You're getting older. This is the gift.
Yeah.
And so many people are just so caught up in what getting older means, and it's like, you're still so young.
Yeah. It's interesting too, because, you know, my husband's parents are 70 and I mean, they're like thriving, like they're busier than me. Like my mother-in-law is in graduate school right now, like, or getting her master's or something. I might have said that wrong. But she's just going to school just to learn.
Yeah. Wow.
And my 70-year-old father-in-law is like a stained glass artist that like goes to like fairs every weekend. Like, they feel so young.
Yeah.
But we talk often because they talk so often about death, because they're at the point of their life where people around them are dying. And, you know, I fear for the day, one, for me, but two, that my husband loses his parents, because I don't know who he'll be. His parents are he has the healthiest parents. Like, I didn't even know people could love their parents and have such admiration for their parents with nothing negative until I thought there was something wrong with this man. Like, you just love your parents, but
you want to spend time with them.
like, you just like we could just go there for weeks.
You're just calling them just because?
Yeah, like, what
are you sure?
I told my dad, I was like, I have no problem throwing blame at you. Like, they just can't even do it. And my dad's like, yeah, you're very good at that. But I say all that to say, you know, in conversation, Shay's like, you know, my parents are older, so I don't feel like I can't. He's like, I don't know how to talk about it with you sometimes because you lost your mom so young. And I'm like, but loss is still loss.
Yeah.
Even if your parents are 70, it's still your parents. Like, that's still going to hit you the same way. So it is such a blessing that they turned 70, but I will still miss them just as much, you know? So I just think that's like such an interesting thing about age with grief is like, yeah, my mom didn't get to live as much of a life as them, but it doesn't mean that like losing your parent when they're much older does not make it any easier for you.
Which I think is an interesting point because I do think people, I always call it like the stub toe theory, is like when you're experiencing trauma or you're experiencing grief and someone else is like, well, mine isn't as bad. But it's like, no.
It's as bad to you.
It's your life. Like your stub toe is still going to hurt so badly even though I'm going through this. But I think it helps is that we keep it in perspective. So for you, it's like you lost your mom so young and his parents are older. So the perspective is they've lived a longer life.
Yeah.
So it's all about keeping the perspective rather than trauma comparing.
Yeah.
Because I think that's what people tend to do. And it's like, no, this all is awful. Loss is loss. It's just at what point.
Yeah. And the worst thing that happened to me and the worst thing that happened to you could be very realistically different.
Yeah.
But still, it's the worst thing that happened to you.
Yeah.
So that's going to hurt you a lot. You don't have to be like, her mom died, so I shouldn't feel bad. That's not going to make you feel any better. Like,
Exactly.
It's still going to feel bad.
Exactly.
Which is like I'm curious to see, and again, I'm assuming people will listen to this, like there's going to be levels of grief we're not even thinking of that people will feel like they're grieving, whether it's like friendships or relationships, or maybe people grieve their pets and it's hard. Like, I don't know.
Exactly.
It'll be interesting, but pain is pain. And so it's been an interesting grief journey for me in general, but I think using MAD as like a template, using MAD as like a barometer of my feelings and how in tune I am with the pain I feel over losing my mom. I spoke for years and I was fine, but I would say around 29 right before the pandemic, I stopped being able to do it without crying, without sobbing. And when we moved to LA, I came back to my team here, the MAD team. I mean, I loved the people I met in New York. I actually kicked off the victim impact panel there. I was their first speaker, which is basically the first time you get a DUI, it's part of your court mandate. You have to hear a victim's story. And so I got to speak to thousands of people and be like, you get a second chance. This is what you could have done to someone.
Right.
But because you didn't kill someone when you drove drunk, you now have the opportunity to go out there and make a better choice. Or you could look at someone like me in court and have this pain be directed at you.
Yeah.
And obviously like that pretty much hits people.
Yeah, no, that's that. I'm just gonna take a second for that because that it does. And I would imagine that is really, really powerful, but also extremely difficult for you to
It's gotten
to embody.
Yeah. So once I moved to, it's interesting too, because when I did it in LA before for years, it was in downtown LA. I lived in Silver Lake, it was 10 minutes, it was great. When I moved back to LA in 2021, it moved to Torrance, which is where I grew up.
The trigger place.
Within 5 minutes of where, one of the places my mom lived. My dad came and saw me speak for the first time, and after doing it for so long, and I was in Torrance, and I was like, guys, I don't think I can do this anymore. Yeah. And then there's a girl who, Allison Dewey, I want to say her name is. There's a girl that went to my high school I didn't know, but a year before my mom died, she was killed by a drunk driver. Her mom speaks too. I don't know if I've ever spoken at the same time as her, but she was there that day. She was the person before me. So I'm in the back, like, so nervous. Like, I don't think I can do this anymore. Like, this has gotten so much harder. And then I hear a story of someone I know, or like I know in context.
Right.
And so at that point, I was just like, my grief has hit me in a way. The older I get, the harder it gets. So I feel so bad when people are like, I just lost my mom. Like, what can you say to me? And I'm like, nothing. I can't say anything to you. All I can tell you is that no one can make you feel better. So don't like look for that in people, because it won't work.
I always say too that the one thing that can make this better is bringing the person back, and no one has the ability to do that. So it's not necessarily about what can you do. You know, we'll get into this on a later episode too of how to support people in grief, but there's nothing that anybody can say in this moment, in these years, to make it better. You just have to be in it.
Yeah. So that's where I'm at. That's the end of my first. That's the end of the, what's the word? Quick.
Yeah, the hyphenated
glimpse.
version. Yeah.
Of
Well,
my
I
6,
think
17 years.
too, you know, again, with bringing both of our stories to the table that are so diverse, like your story, it started at death, right? And then you have all of these years after, whereas mine, you know, there was more of a build-up and the sickness and the diagnosis and all of that. And so I just think, one, for the fact that you've been able to do everything that you've done so far with your grief journey and what you're, you know, doing now and setting up for, I think is going to help a lot of people. And you have a really, I mean, when you told me your story originally when we first met, I think I cried 3 times during it. And, you know, my heart goes out for you. It went out for you then, it goes out for you still. Like, it's an everyday journey for you and for me and for everybody else that is on the grief journey. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you. The last thing I'll say is that I, like anyone probably, had doubts about thinking that I had anything worth sharing. I mean, everyone has a podcast. What am I going to share? But being able to just talk with you and see my words move you to tears because it was relatable. I wasn't trying to be relatable.
Right.
I was just talking about my life. That confirmed to me that potentially there are other people that from both of us and from our guests. I mean, like we were talking earlier, we're not experts on grief. We're just trying to create conversations for people who don't, so that they don't feel alone in this journey and can hopefully help heal in any way possible through that. But thank you for, like, I'm so glad we met, obviously, for many reasons. But that was the confirmation that, like, okay, maybe I can help people. And that enough has always been worth it. I used to speak for Matt and say, if one person leaves out of these 100 people and doesn't drink and drive again,
I just got chills again,
then I'm good. And if one person listens to this,
feels
if we do
less
this
alone.
for a year and we have one subscriber, but we can help them feel less alone, then I'll keep doing it. So
Absolutely. I agree. So thank you.
thank you. Deuces.